He was a maintenance worker. She was a billion-dollar CEO. And the only reason she survived the night was because she had humiliated him 6 hours earlier. When Isabella Carter's entire security team turned against her, the guards she paid, the commander she trusted, the system she built, there was no backup plan, no emergency protocol, no failsafe buried in her servers. There was only a man in worn work clothes standing in the dark outside a warehouse, deciding whether a woman who had called him insignificant in front of a room full of people was worth bleeding for. He went in anyway. This is a story about power, betrayal, and the kind of quiet strength that doesn't announce itself. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel and follow this story all the way to the end, because the next one is going to hit just as hard. Hit that like button and drop your city and country in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. The investor meeting had been scheduled for 7 o'clock, but by 6:45, the 32nd floor of Carter Securities headquarters already smelled like money. Expensive cologne, fresh leather portfolios, the kind of bottled water that came in glass instead of plastic. Nathan Reed noticed all of it the moment he stepped off the service elevator. He wasn't supposed to be up here. His assignment that evening was routine. Check the backup generator on the 28th floor, verify the freight elevator calibration, sign off on a maintenance log that nobody would read. But one of the building's senior technicians had called in sick, and the facility's supervisor had texted Nathan at 6:15, asking him to do a walkthrough of the event floor before the meeting started. Just a quick sweep, 10 minutes tops. Don't touch anything. Nathan had pulled on a clean jacket over his work shirt, clipped his ID badge to his chest, and taken the stairs from 28 to 32 because the main elevator was reserved for guests. He was 40 steps into the room when he started seeing problems. The security configuration was wrong. Not obviously wrong. Not the kind of wrong that would make a trained observer reach for a radio or pull someone aside. It was subtler than that. It was the kind of wrong that only registered if you'd spent years learning how spaces got used against the people inside them. The sightlines from the main entrance didn't cover the northwest corner of the room. The 2 secondary exits were propped open, fire safety probably, given the number of people expected, but that also meant 2 points of entry that weren't being monitored. The backup camera positioned above the bar had been angled slightly off its mount, leaving a blind patch about 15 feet wide near the boardroom corridor, and the security personnel stationed at the door were rotating positions on a predictable schedule, every 12 minutes. You could set a watch to it. Nathan stood near the window and looked out at the city for a moment, the way you might if you were just a maintenance worker killing time before his next task. Then he turned around and did the math. He spent 3 more minutes in the room. Then he went looking for someone to tell. The problem was finding the right someone. The event coordinator was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s named Linda, who looked at his ID badge and immediately pointed him toward the service corridor. The junior security officer near the beverage station listened to about 40 seconds of what Nathan was saying before his radio crackled and he walked away mid-sentence. The facility's supervisor, when Nathan called him, said, "Just write it in the log." Nathan stood in the hallway outside the main doors, holding his phone, thinking about whether it was worth pushing further. He decided it was. The woman he needed to talk to was Isabella Carter. He'd seen her photo in the building directory. Dark hair, precise posture, the kind of face that looked like it hadn't been surprised in a long time. He'd also heard things, the way you hear things when you work maintenance in a building for 8 months. Demanding, smart, doesn't repeat herself, doesn't tolerate incompetence. Not cruel exactly, but not someone who had a lot of patience for people who wasted her time. Nathan was aware that walking up to the CEO of the company before a major investor meeting to tell her that her security setup had problems was likely to go badly. He went anyway. Enut. She was standing near the boardroom entrance with 2 people who were clearly senior staff, reviewing something on a tablet, when Nathan approached. He waited until there was a half-second gap in the conversation, and then he said her name. Isabella Carter looked up. Her expression didn't change much. She took in the work jacket, the ID badge, the clipboard he was still holding from the maintenance walkthrough. Then she looked at his face, and something behind her eyes recalibrated, not unkindly, exactly, but with the automatic efficiency of someone who sorted people into categories very quickly and moved on. "Can I help you?" she said. "My name's Nathan Reed. I'm on the facilities team. I was doing a pre-event walkthrough up here and I noticed a few things in the security configuration I wanted to flag. One of the people beside her, a man in his late 40s with a close-cut beard and the bearing of someone who was accustomed to being the most capable person in any room, turned to look at Nathan with an expression that was somewhere between amusement and irritation. His name, Nathan would later learn, was Victor Hale, head of corporate security. 12 years with the company. The security configuration, Victor said, not quite making it a question. Yes, sir. Sightline coverage on the northwest corner, the camera mount above the bar, the rotation schedule on the door detail. I appreciate the concern, Victor said, already turning back toward Isabella. But I think we've got it covered. There's a blind patch near the boardroom corridor, Nathan said. About 15 feet, and your secondary exits are open on a fixed schedule. If someone wanted to use that window, Mr. Reed, Isabella's voice was quiet, but it landed with weight. She handed the tablet back to her assistant without looking away from him. Victor's team has been coordinating security for this building for over a decade. Tonight's operation was designed by people with considerably more expertise than a facilities walkthrough provides. Nathan held her gaze. I'm not questioning the expertise. I'm describing what I observed. The air in the hallway shifted slightly. One of the staff members near the door had stopped pretending not to listen. You observed, Isabella said, and there was something almost careful in her voice now, the way someone speaks when they're deciding exactly how sharp to be. From a maintenance walkthrough. Yes. She studied him for a moment, then she said calmly and clearly enough that everyone nearby could hear. I built a company worth $4 billion on the understanding that security is not a feeling, it's a system. And I trust the system we have, not the instincts of a maintenance worker who spent 10 minutes in the room. She paused just briefly. Was there anything else? The dismissal was complete. Not angry, not even particularly mean, just final, the way a door closing is final. Nathan didn't argue. He didn't explain himself. He thought about saying something else and decided it would accomplish nothing. He said, "No, ma'am." And then, because there was nothing else to do, he said the one thing he'd been thinking since he first walked the room. Even the strongest system fails when you trust the wrong people. Isabella looked at him. Excuse me? Just something worth keeping in mind, Nathan said. Have a good evening. He turned and walked back toward the service corridor. Behind him, he heard a Victor say something low, and then one of the staff members laughed. A quick, quiet laugh. The kind people make when they're agreeing with someone without wanting to be seen doing it. Nathan kept walking. He was in the stairwell on his way down when he stopped and sat on a step for a minute. He pressed his palms against his knees and breathed. There was a thing that happened sometimes in spaces like that one, like rooms with too many people, too many variables, too many things positioned wrong. A particular kind of awareness that wasn't quite anxiety and wasn't quite alertness, but lived somewhere in between. His body still knew how to read a room the way it had been trained to, even when the rest of him was trying very hard to forget the training existed. He'd spent 4 years trying to make that stop, trying to just be a person who repaired things and drove vehicles, and picked his daughter up from school at 3:15 and made dinner and watched whatever she wanted on television on Friday nights. Trying to be small in the best possible sense of the word, not invisible, but contained, present, ordinary. His daughter's name was Mia. She was 8 years old and currently staying with their neighbor, Mrs. Garland, who kept hard candy in a bowl by the door and let Mia watch 2 extra hours of television on nights Nathan worked late. Mia had called him at 5:30 to tell him about a drawing she'd made at school, a dog they didn't own, which she had named Captain, and who she intended to convince Nathan to actually get sometime in the next calendar year. He had told her he'd be home by 9. He pulled out his phone and looked at the time. It was 6:53. He should go. He had a maintenance log to finish, a drive home, a daughter waiting, a Friday evening that asked nothing of him except to show up for it. He stood, picked up his clipboard, and kept going down the stairs. The lobby of the building at this hour was its own kind of organized chaos. Guests still arriving, security running final checks at the entrance, catering staff moving equipment through the side corridors with the focused urgency of people who had learned to be invisible. Nathan signed out at the facilities desk, handed his radio to the shift coordinator, and was 3 steps from the front door when he heard something. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of thing that would have meant anything to most people. It was a radio frequency. Bleeding through the channel on the equipment cart passing near the security station. Not the building's frequency, but something adjacent to it. Something that sounded, for just a moment, like a coordinated check-in. Nathan stood very still. In a different life, he would have been able to tell you exactly what channel that was, what the check-in pattern meant, how many people it indicated, and how long before they'd be in position. He stood there for 6 seconds. Then he walked back to the facilities desk and asked the shift coordinator if he could borrow his radio for a few more minutes. "Thought you were done for the night," the coordinator said. "I want to do one more pass on the 28th floor," Nathan said. "Generator relay I wasn't happy with." The coordinator shrugged and handed over the radio. Nathan clipped it to his belt and walked toward the elevator. He didn't go to the 28th floor. By 7:20, the investor meeting was underway. Nathan had positioned himself in the service corridor on the 32nd floor, which ran along the back wall of the main event space. From the ventilation access near the far end, he could see a partial sight line into the room. He told himself he was being paranoid. He'd been told that before, by people who knew better than he did, and sometimes they were right. Sometimes a feeling was just a feeling. Sometimes a camera mount was just a camera mount that had gotten jostled during setup, and a rotation schedule was just whatever the team lead had decided that morning, and a radio frequency was just bleed from someone's consumer device. He stood in the corridor and listened. At 7:31, Isabella Carter was at the front of the room, addressing 12 investors and their associates, talking about the company's expansion into federal contract territory. Her voice was steady and practiced, the voice of someone who had given this kind of speech enough times that it had become its own kind of armor. Victor Hale stood at the back of the room near the main door, arms crossed, face neutral. Nathan watched him for a long time. There are tells when you know what to look for, not obvious ones. Not the kind you'd see in a movie where the villain checks his watch or exchanges a loaded glance with his accomplice across a crowded room. The tells are smaller than that. The way someone's weight shifts. The particular quality of their stillness, not relaxed stillness, but coiled stillness. The kind that comes from waiting for a signal. Victor Hale's stillness was coiled. Nathan pulled out his phone and opened his contacts. He stared at the screen for a moment. There was a number he hadn't dialed in 3 years. A contact listed only as DL, which stood for nothing that would make sense to anyone else but meant something specific and private to Nathan. A former teammate. Someone who still existed in the world Nathan had left. Someone who could make calls Nathan couldn't. His thumb hovered over the screen. He thought about Mia, who was waiting for him at Mrs. Garland's house, probably watching a movie with her shoes off and a piece of hard candy in her cheek. He thought about what he'd seen in that room. The blind patch, the open exits, the rotation schedule, the radio frequency. He thought about what he'd said in that hallway, and how Isabella Carter had looked at him when he said it, and how she'd turned away. He thought about the fact that none of that changed what he'd seen. He pressed call. The line picked up on the second ring. "It's Reed," he said quietly. "I need you to run a background check for me, fast as you can." A pause. Then, "How fast?" "I have maybe 40 minutes. Another pause. "Name?" Nathan watched Victor through the ventilation slit, still and waiting in the back of the room. "Victor Hale," he said. "Head of Corporate Security, Carter Security Solutions, and a man named Damian Cross. He's a competitor. I need everything you can find about any connection between them." "Nathan," the voice on the other end was careful. "You back in something?" "No," Nathan said. "I'm just a maintenance worker who can't let something go." He leaned against the corridor wall, kept his eyes on the room, and waited. The city lights pressed against the windows 32 floors up, cold and indifferent and absolutely everywhere, the way cities always were, full of systems and signals and people trusting the wrong things. 40 minutes, he thought. He hoped he had that long. The call back came in 19 minutes. Nathan was still in the service corridor, back against the wall, watching the room through the ventilation slit when his phone buzzed twice. The signal they'd agreed on, back when signals like that were part of daily life. He pressed the phone to his ear and kept his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry past the metal walls around him. "Talk to me," he said. DL's voice was flat and careful, the way it always got when the information was bad. Victor Hale, 14 years military, 8 years private security, 2 years with Carter. Clean record on paper. But 6 months ago, he opened a shell account in his wife's maiden name. Small deposits, regular intervals, consulting fees, supposedly. From who? A holding company called Meridian Tactical Group, which, if you trace it back through 3 layers of incorporation, belongs to a man named Damian Cross. Nathan closed his eyes for 1 second. Just one. Then he opened them again and looked through the slit at Victor, who was still standing near the back wall with his arms crossed and his face arranged into an expression of professional calm. "How much?" Nathan asked. "Enough to buy someone's loyalty. Not enough to buy their conscience. Which tells me Hale convinced himself this was going to be clean. Whatever they're planning, he probably sold himself on the idea that nobody gets hurt." "That's always how it starts," Nathan said. "Yeah, Nathan, what are you walking into?" "I don't know yet," he paused, "but I think I'm about to find out." He ended the call and stood there for a moment with the phone in his hand, trying to figure out his next move. The problem was the same problem it had been an hour ago, just more urgent now. He had information and no authority. He was a maintenance worker with a borrowed radio and a name on a phone screen. The people in that room weren't going to listen to him. The one person who might need to hear this had already told him in front of a hallway full of witnesses that she trusted her system and not his instincts. He could call the police. He thought about that seriously for about 45 seconds. But he didn't have enough. Not the kind of enough that would get a response fast enough to matter. A shell account. A connection between 2 men. No overt threat. No crime in progress. Nothing that translated into flashing lights in the next 15 minutes. What he had was a feeling built from evidence, and the evidence was solid. But the feeling was his, and nobody here was going to trust it. He put the phone in his pocket and started moving. The meeting broke up at 8:10. Nathan had repositioned to the main corridor by then, staying near the catering station where nobody looked twice at a man in a work jacket standing close to the wall. He watched the investors filter out, watched the assistants gathering materials, watched the body language of the room, the way he'd once watched the body language of streets in places where the wrong red could get you killed. Isabella was the last to leave the main space. She was talking to a young woman Nathan would later identify as Claire Morgan, her executive assistant. Mid-20s, quick eyes, a tablet permanently in her left hand. They were walking and talking at the same time, the practiced efficiency of 2 people who'd worked together long enough to have their own rhythm. Victor fell into step about 6 feet behind Isabella, and Nathan watched the precise moment when Victor's phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen and something in his jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. The signal. Whatever it was, it had just arrived. Nathan moved. He came around the corner of the catering station and stepped into the corridor, directly into the path of the group, and he said, "Miss Carter." Isabella stopped. Her expression when she saw him was complicated. Not quite recognition, not quite irritation, somewhere in the middle. The CEO who had never expected to see the maintenance worker again that evening. "Mr. Reed," she said, "is there a facilities issue I need to know about?" "I need 30 seconds of your time, privately." Victor stepped forward immediately, not aggressive, but deliberate. "Miss Carter's car is waiting. We're already behind schedule." 30 seconds, Nathan said again, not looking at Victor, looking at her. Something in Isabella's face shifted. It might have been the tone of his voice. It might have been the way he was holding himself, still, but not relaxed, the particular tension of a man who has already decided what he's going to do and is just waiting to see if anyone's going to let him do it the easy way. "Give us a minute," she said. "Isabella?" Victor started. "A minute, Victor." Victor's expression didn't change, but he stepped back and he took his phone out and looked at the screen again, and Nathan watched that happen and filed it away. When Isabella turned to face Nathan, she had put back on the face she wore in meeting rooms. Contained, professional, a little remote. "What is it?" Nathan kept his voice low. "Victor Hale has been receiving payments from a holding company connected to Damian Cross for the past 6 months. I had it verified 20 minutes ago. Whatever convoy you're stepping into tonight, the route has been compromised. The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds, which was long enough to tell him she wasn't immediately dismissing it. That's a serious accusation, she said. Yes. Based on what source? Someone I trust. Her eyes narrowed slightly. You trust? A maintenance worker's personal contact. I know how that sounds. Do you? She glanced down the corridor toward Victor, who was standing with his back partially turned, still on his phone. When she looked back at Nathan, her expression was harder to read than it had been. Even if I believed you in, which I'm not saying I do, I'm already committed to this convoy. The investors I just met with expect me at the waterfront dinner in 40 minutes. If I cancel or reroute without cause, Cross's people will know something spooked us. Then let me ride along, Nathan said. Not as security, as a driver. Your backup vehicle. I was already assigned to it. It's legitimate. Victor can't object without it looking strange. She stared at him. You already think I'm wrong, he said. If I'm wrong, nothing happens and you get to the dinner. But if I'm right... If you're right, she said quietly, then I'm walking into something my own security chief arranged with no warning and no backup. You'll have one backup, Nathan said. It was not a reassuring thing to say, and he knew it, and he didn't try to make it sound like more than it was. Isabella looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, You were in the military. It wasn't a question. He didn't ask how she knew. Yes, he said. What branch? Navy. She held his gaze for another second. Then she turned and walked back toward Victor and the waiting group, and Nathan couldn't tell from her posture whether she believed him or not. He found out when the convoy formed up outside the building at 8:35, and the lead security officer handed Nathan a set of vehicle keys without any instruction or explanation, just the keys, and a look that said someone upstairs had added him to the roster. Victor noticed. He came across the parking structure toward the backup vehicle with his hands in his jacket pockets, and his face arranged into the particular expression of a man who is very good at not showing what he's thinking. Reed, he said. Mr. Hale. Thought your shift was done. Got reassigned. Nathan unlocked the vehicle and checked the mirrors without making it obvious he was also checking the space around them. Short notice thing. Victor stood there for a moment, and Nathan could feel the calculation happening. Whether to push back, whether to make a call, whether this changed something in whatever sequence of events had already been set in motion. Then Victor smiled, and it was a professionally warm smile, the kind that didn't reach the eyes. Welcome to the team, he said, and walked away. Nathan watched him go and thought, he's going to make a call in the next 3 minutes. He's going to tell whoever is waiting that there's a variable. He hoped the variable didn't change the timeline enough to matter. The convoy left at 8:47. 3 vehicles, the lead SUV carrying Victor and 2 security officers, the center vehicle carrying Isabella and Claire Morgan, and the backup, Nathan. They were supposed to be heading to the Harborview Grand, a waterfront hotel about 4 miles from the building. The route Victor had filed with the building's security log went south on Meridian, east on Caldwell, then down to the waterfront via Commerce Street. Nathan knew the route. He'd driven it before, doing a vehicle check for a company event 3 months ago. He also knew, within the first 6 minutes of the convoy moving, that they weren't on it. The lead SUV had taken a right on Kellerman instead of continuing to Caldwell. Small deviation. Could be traffic. Could be a late update from one of the security team members who'd scouted the route earlier. Nathan stayed 2 car lengths back and didn't close the gap, and said nothing on the radio. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to DL, convoy, route deviation, Kellerman instead of Caldwell, flagging. DL responded in under a minute. Kellerman takes you toward the Port District, industrial, low foot traffic after 8 p.m. Nathan set the phone on the seat beside him and kept driving. The city changed around them in the way cities do when you move away from lit commercial streets toward the working edges of things. The architecture getting lower and older, the streetlights getting farther apart, the pedestrian traffic thinning to almost nothing. The Port District at this hour was all chain-link fencing and container yards, and the distant mechanical sound of equipment moving things from place to place. It was not where you went for a waterfront dinner. He keyed his radio. Lead vehicle, This is backup. Confirming we're still en route to Harborview? Victor's voice came back immediately, smooth and unhurried. Slight adjustment. Scouts flagged congestion on Commerce. We're going around. Copy that, Nathan said. He turned the radio's volume down and picked up his phone. He dialed Isabella's cell number. He'd gotten it from the company directory that afternoon, which was something he'd done on instinct rather than plan, and he was grateful for it now. The call went to voicemail. He tried again. Voicemail again. She was in a moving vehicle with Claire Morgan and a driver he didn't know. Her phone was probably in her bag. She probably wasn't checking it. He sent a text instead. Route is wrong. This is not an adjustment. Be ready to move on my word. Then he put both hands on the wheel and drove. The lead SUV slowed as they entered a section of the Port District. Nathan didn't have a name for. A stretch of abandoned warehouse facilities set back from the road behind a wide gravel lot, the buildings dark, the fencing along the perimeter broken in several places. The kind of place that existed in every large city, forgotten infrastructure, space between things, useful to nobody, honest. The convoy pulled into the gravel lot and stopped. Nathan stopped the backup vehicle about 40 yards behind the others and kept the engine running. For about 8 seconds, nothing happened. Then the lighting, the sparse industrial streetlights that had been visible along the road, went out. All of them simultaneously, which meant someone had killed the circuit rather than waiting for them to fail individually. Nathan's eyes adjusted. He had his hand on the door handle before the second had passed. From the center vehicle, he saw a door open, the driver's side, and the driver step out and walk calmly toward Victor's SUV without any explanation or instruction to his passengers. Just got out and walked away. Nathan was already moving. He came out of the backup vehicle low and used the darkness the same way he'd used darkness in a dozen situations that had all felt impossible at the time, and had all, eventually, resolved into one outcome or another. He moved along the gravel with his weight forward, keeping the bulk of the vehicles between himself and where he estimated the perimeter was. The sounds that followed were not complicated. There were 6 of them, 4 from the outer fence line, 2 from behind the largest warehouse. And they moved with the discipline of people who had done this before. Not military precision, but practiced enough. They surrounded the center and lead vehicles without rushing, and Nathan stayed in the shadows between his vehicle and a collapsed section of fencing and watched and counted and mapped. Victor stepped out of the lead SUV like he was arriving at a meeting. Jacket straightened, phone in hand, entirely comfortable in the dark. Tell the driver to bring her out, he said to no one in particular. She's locked herself in, someone said. Victor made a small sound of impatience. Then he walked to the center vehicle himself, knocked on the glass, and said in a voice that was still professionally pleasant, Miss Carter, there's no point in this. The car isn't going anywhere, and neither are you. Come out, and this stays simple. Nathan was 15 feet away, behind the vehicle's rear quarter panel, close enough to hear Isabella's voice when she responded. Victor. Her voice was steadier than he'd expected. Controlled, but just barely. He could hear the edge underneath it, the place where the control was costing her something. Whatever he's paying you, it isn't worth this. That's a conversation for another time, Victor said. Come out. Tell me something first. A pause. Was it always the plan? From the beginning? Victor was quiet for a moment. 6 months, he said, since Cross made his first offer. Another pause, and for just a second his voice shifted into something that wasn't quite regret, but was adjacent to it. You're a smart woman, Isabella. You just don't know how to trust people, so people stopped trusting you back. That's a story you're telling yourself, she said, so you can sleep. Victor knocked on the glass again, harder this time. Get out of the car. Nathan had already made his decision. He'd made it, he realized, somewhere around the moment he'd borrowed the facilities coordinator's radio and told himself he was going to check on a generator. He sent one text to DL, Port District, warehouse lot off Kellerman, 6 tangibles minimum. I need someone to know where I am. Then he put the phone away, and he moved. But the first one he took down quietly. The man stationed at the rear of the center vehicle, facing the wrong direction because he'd been watching Victor rather than watching the perimeter. Nathan came in from the left and it was over fast, no sound louder than a sharp exhale and the crunch of gravel absorbing weight. He dragged the man back behind the vehicle and took his radio and his zip ties, which turned out to be a useful find. The second was harder. The man had better instincts and turned at the right moment, and they struggled briefly in the dark. And Nathan came out of it with a gash along his left forearm from a blade he hadn't seen coming. Not deep enough to matter, but immediate and unpleasant, and a reminder that this was not a controlled environment. He made it to the side of a rusted equipment shed on the eastern edge of the lot, pressed his back against it, and breathed. His arm was bleeding. Not badly, but enough. He tore a strip from the hem of his work shirt, an unglamorous solution to an immediate problem, and wrapped it tight and kept moving. From the equipment shed, he could see the full picture of the lot now. Victor still standing beside the center vehicle, 2 men he hadn't dealt with stationed at the front, 2 more near the fence line, and a 6th that he couldn't immediately place. Isabella was still inside the vehicle. Claire was beside her, which he confirmed through the window glass when a distant light source briefly illuminated the interior. He had 2 down, 4 visible, 1 unknown. The problem was Victor. Victor was smart enough and close enough to Isabella that any move Nathan made toward the vehicle risked becoming a standoff that Nathan couldn't win with numbers. He needed to change the math. He keyed Victor's stolen radio and said, in the flattest voice he could manage, 2 men down on the east side, we've got a problem. The reaction from the lot was immediate. Heads turning, Victor lifting his own radio, the 2 men near the fence moving toward the east side to check. Nathan was already on the other side of the vehicle. He pulled the door open. It wasn't locked, he realized. It had never been locked. Isabella had been buying time. And he said, quickly and without ceremony, "We need to go, right now. Stay low." Isabella Carter stared at him from the back seat of a car in a pitch-dark abandoned lot, her careful composure fractured at the edges, her hair slightly disheveled from however long she'd been braced in the dark. She looked at his face, and then at his arm, and then at his face again. "You're bleeding," she said. "Little bit," he said. "We need to move." She grabbed Claire's arm and they came out of the vehicle. Victor turned at the sound and shouted something, and Nathan was already steering them toward the gap in the fence, moving fast through the dark, the gravel loud under their feet, everything loud, the darkness not deep enough and the fence too far, and Victor's voice behind them sharp and angry and stripped of its professional calm at last. Nathan got them through the fence with his body blocking the gap, pushed them toward the street beyond, turned back once to make sure nobody was immediately behind them, and then ran. His arm was bleeding through the improvised wrap. His lungs were burning with the effort of running while staying aware of everything behind and around them. Claire Morgan was faster than he'd expected. Isabella was fast too, but she was running in shoes that were not made for this, and he could hear the uneven rhythm of it. "Left," he said. "There's a cross street. Don't stop." "Where are we going?" Isabella managed between breaths. "Away from here first," he said. "We figure out the rest after." They ran. Behind them, the lot erupted into activity. Voices, footsteps on gravel, the sound of a vehicle starting. Victor had resources Nathan didn't. He had more people and a car and a phone with a number in it he could call when things went wrong. What Nathan had was a head start, and the absolute certainty, settled somewhere below thought, that he was not going to let them catch up. The cross street came up faster than he'd expected. He turned them left into a narrow service road that ran between 2 warehouse buildings, dark enough that the headlights from Victor's vehicle swept past the entrance without catching them. They pressed into a recessed doorway, all 3 of them, and stood there breathing. Claire had her tablet clutched against her chest like a shield. Isabella was looking at Nathan with an expression he couldn't read in the dark. Not gratitude, not quite, but something that had more weight to it than he'd expected. "You came back," she said. Not an accusation, not quite a question. Nathan pressed his back against the door and listened to the sounds from the lot. The vehicle had moved out to the street. He could hear it idling somewhere nearby. "I was still in the building when I figured it out," he said. "I didn't actually leave." A beat. "You stayed," she said. "I stayed." Isabella was quiet for a moment. In the dark, without the armor of the meeting room and the boardroom and the $4 billion company around her, She looked like what she was, a person who had trusted the wrong people and was now standing in a service alley with a cut-up maintenance worker trying to understand how the night had come apart so completely. "What do we do now?" Claire asked. Her voice was steady, which Nathan noted and respected. "We need to get to somewhere with people," Nathan said. "Cameras, foot traffic, hard to approach without being seen. There's a transit hub about 6 blocks west. If we can get there, we're out of their reach." 6 blocks, Isabella said, "through the back streets. I know the route." She looked at him for another second. Then she straightened her jacket, the gesture of someone returning to themselves, reassembling something, even here, and said, "Lead the way." They moved out of the doorway and into the dark, Nathan ahead, the 2 women close behind, the vehicle's idling engine somewhere to the south, the city's ordinary light visible in the distance like something they were still allowed to reach. His arm ached. His shoes were not made for running 6 blocks, and he was going to feel it tomorrow. He was also going to be at least 2 hours late picking up Mia from Mrs. Garland's house, and he was going to have to explain that in a way that an 8-year-old could understand and not worry about. He thought about that while he moved, the ordinary problem sitting right beside the immediate one, because that was how life actually worked. Nothing cleaned up into a single focus, everything at once, the important and the urgent and the mundane all happening in the same body at the same moment. The service road curved north. He took it. Behind him, he heard Isabella's shoes on the pavement, uneven and determined, and Claire's quieter footsteps, and the distant sound of a vehicle that was still looking and had not found them yet. He kept moving. The transit hub was called Westport Station, and at 9:15 on a Friday evening, it was exactly what Nathan had needed it to be. Loud, lit, full of people moving in every direction with the particular purposeful randomness of a public space that never fully closed down. They came in through the east entrance, the 3 of them, and Nathan steered them immediately toward the center of the main concourse rather than the edges, because edges gave cover to people who didn't want to be seen, and right now he wanted them visible and surrounded and difficult to approach without witnesses. He found a bench near the information board, positioned between a coffee kiosk and the main foot traffic corridor, and said, "Sit here. Don't move unless I tell you to." Isabella sat. She looked at the people moving around them with the stunned expression of someone whose understanding of the world had just been reorganized in a very short period of time. Claire sat beside her and immediately opened her tablet, and Nathan almost said something about it before he realized she was pulling up Carter Security's internal communication logs, working, already, with whatever she had in her hands, her face tight and focused. Nathan stayed standing. He positioned himself so he could see both entrances and the coffee kiosk and the escalators down to the lower level, and he pressed the improvised bandage on his arm and looked at the blood on his palm and decided it had slowed enough to stop being a problem. His phone buzzed. "DL, sent your location to 2 people I trust. They're 20 minutes out. Former colleagues. They'll identify as recon. Don't shoot them." Nathan typed back, "Appreciated. Keep the line open." He looked at the entrances again. No sign of Victor's vehicle or anyone from the lot. The 6-block route through the service roads had bought them time, and Westport Station's cameras were everywhere, which meant anyone pursuing them would know it too. He turned back to the bench. "You're mapping the internal logs," he said to Claire. She looked up. "Someone had to feed Victor the convoy route. It would have gone through the ops coordinator. I'm checking who accessed the file and when." "Can you do that from the tablet?" "I have admin access to 3 of our servers," she said, in the tone of someone who finds the question slightly redundant. "Give me 12 minutes. Nathan looked at Isabella. "How are you doing?" It was a strange question to ask in a transit hub at 9:15 after the evening they'd had, and he knew it, but he asked it anyway because he genuinely wanted to know, and because she was sitting very still in the way that sometimes meant someone was about to be fine, and sometimes meant they were holding something back with everything they had. "I've been better," she said. Then, after a pause, "I've also been worse." She looked at her hands for a moment. "I don't know when that happened, that I can say that with any real conviction." He sat down beside her, not close, just close enough that she wasn't speaking to the middle distance. "Victor said 6 months," she said. That's when the payments started. Could have been a conversation earlier. A year, she said quietly. Cross made his first public offer to acquire the company about a year ago. I turned it down in a press statement. She stopped. I was not particularly diplomatic about it. What did you say? A ghost of something moved across her face, that his company's security infrastructure was 12 years behind the industry standard, and the only thing he was acquiring was time he didn't have. Nathan looked at her. In a press statement. I was having a bad week. Right. I'm aware it wasn't my finest moment. I didn't say anything. You didn't have to. She exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that was about releasing something rather than taking it in. He went after Victor because Victor was the point of access. Victor knew everything: schedules, routes, security codes, internal vulnerabilities. If someone was going to hand over the company from the inside, it had to go through him. She paused. I promoted Victor 8 months ago, gave him a raise. I thought he was the best person I had. Maybe he was, Nathan said, before Cross found him. She looked at him. Is that supposed to make me feel better? No, it's just true. People make decisions for reasons that don't always have much to do with who they were before the decision. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the people moving through the concourse. A family with 2 small kids and a rolling suitcase. A group of young men laughing about something on a phone. An old woman reading a paperback with the focused composure of someone who had learned to exist entirely inside a book. You have a daughter, Isabella said. He looked at her. How do you know that? Your employee file. I looked at it after the meeting. She met his eyes. After you walked away, I wanted to know who you were. He wasn't sure how he felt about that. 8 years old, he said. Her name is Mia. Where is she now? Neighbor's house. I'm supposed to be home by 9. He checked his watch. It was 9:23. She's fine. Mrs. Garland's known her since she was 4. Isabella looked at him with an expression that had something careful in it. You left her to come back for me. I didn't know it was going to be this long when I borrowed the radio, he said, and it came out a little dry, and she made a sound that was almost a laugh. Short, surprised, like she hadn't expected to make it. Fair enough, she said. Iterman. Claire found it in 9 minutes, which was 3 minutes ahead of her own estimate. Ops coordinator is a man named Brett Salas, she said, turning the tablet so they could see the screen. He accessed the convoy route file at 4:17 this afternoon. Standard procedure. That's within his clearance. But he also exported a copy of the file at 5:52, which is not standard procedure, and sent it to an external address through a personal email account he accessed from the company server. She paused. He's been with the company for 2 years. Victor hired him. Victor built his own infrastructure, Nathan said. Apparently. Claire's voice was level, but her hand on the tablet was pressed tight. He also accessed Isabella's personal schedule for the next 6 weeks, the security codes for the executive floor, and the emergency evacuation protocols. She looked at Isabella. He has everything. Isabella absorbed this without visible reaction, which Nathan suspected required more effort than it looked. Cross doesn't need to kidnap me, she said. He has enough to compromise the company for months. He still needs you out of the picture, Nathan said. Or compliant. The board can't transfer ownership while you're actively contesting it. So tonight was about creating a situation where I couldn't contest it, she said. Make me disappear long enough for the board to act. Or... She stopped. Or make it look like you acted irrationally, Nathan said. Went somewhere you shouldn't have. Created a crisis. Gave the board cause. She looked at him steadily. You've thought about this. I've thought about a lot of things in the last 2 hours. She held his gaze for a moment. What did you do in the Navy? He'd been waiting for the question since the hallway outside the meeting room. SEAL unit, 12 years. Doing what? Missions that don't get names in public records. He said it without drama, just fact. Hostile extractions, mostly. Getting people out of places they shouldn't have been or couldn't leave on their own. Something shifted in her expression. She looked at him the way you look at a painting when you realize you've been misreading its subject the whole time. You left, she said. Yes. Why? He thought about how to answer that, and he chose the version that was true but not complete, because the complete version belonged to a different conversation in a different place. Because the people giving orders stopped being worth following, and people I was responsible for died because of decisions I didn't make. He paused. After that, I didn't want to be in anything where the stakes were that size. She was quiet. And then tonight happened, he said, with a small flatness that wasn't quite humor but was close enough. Tonight happened, she agreed. Then, I'm sorry for what I said in the hallway, in front of everyone. He'd expected the apology to feel like something, and it did, but not in the way he'd anticipated. It just felt like something settling, not resolved, but acknowledged. You had reason not to trust a random maintenance worker right before a major meeting, he said. I'm not sure I'd have done differently. You wouldn't have said it like that, she said. He didn't answer because she was probably right, and there was no point in being gracious about it. DL's people arrived at 9:41. Two of them, a man and a woman, both in civilian clothes, both with the particular economy of movement that came from training that didn't leave you, no matter how many years you put between yourself and it. They identified themselves as Recon, just as DL had said, and Nathan shook the man's hand and felt something ease slightly in his chest, the specific relief of not being the only competent person in a situation anymore. Their names were Torres and Ren. Torres was broad-shouldered and quiet, the kind of quiet that was a choice rather than a default. Ren was maybe 35, with close-cropped hair and an immediate, assessing way of looking at a room that Nathan recognized from people who'd spent time in surveillance roles. "What's the play?" Torres asked. "We need to get Ms. Carter to somewhere secure, and we need to document what happened tonight before Victor's people have time to build a counter-narrative," Nathan said. "Her assistant has already pulled internal logs. We need physical evidence from the lot. The two men I put down, the vehicles, anything left at the scene." "Scene's probably cleared by now," Ren said. "Probably. But cleared in a hurry leaves traces, and Victor's going to have to explain to someone why the convoy never arrived and where Ms. Carter is." He paused. "He's going to be constructing a story. We need our story to be in place before his is." "The board," Isabella said. She'd been listening with the focused attention of someone taking notes in their head. "There's an emergency board contact, 6 members, all of whom have direct lines. If I call them before Victor does, can you reach them from here? If Claire can get me a clean line." "I have a VoIP app that routes through a separate server," Claire said, already working the tablet. "Victor's people can't trace it to this location." Nathan looked at Torres. "Can you get back to the port district and see what's left?" "Already thinking about it," Torres said. "Ren stays with you." "Agreed." Torres left without ceremony, the way people from that world left places, efficiently, without making the exit into a moment. Nathan watched him go and then turned back to the women. Isabella was looking at him with something that was harder to name than gratitude. "You know these people," she said. "We served together years ago. And they just came because you called." "That's how it works," he said. It came out sounding simple because it was, and also because the alternative, explaining the specific texture of trust that built up between people who had been in impossible situations together, was not something he had the words for or the desire to find them right now. She nodded slowly, like she was filing that understanding somewhere careful. "Make your calls," he said. "I'm going to walk the perimeter." What Nathan didn't say, while he walked the perimeter of Westport Station in a slow, methodical loop, checking sight lines and exits and the faces of the people moving through the space, was that he was also trying to get his hands to stop shaking. It was a delayed thing, always. During "you were fine," the body did what it knew how to do. The mind stayed clear and functional and tactical. It was after, in the spaces between one urgent thing and the next, that the physical reality of what had just happened caught up with you. The gash on his arm was throbbing now with the dull insistence of an injury that had been patient enough to wait until the adrenaline stepped back. His shoulder had taken something during the struggle with the second man in the lot. Not serious, but stiffening, the way these things always did. He was 37 years old and his body was not 19 anymore, and it was making that fact known. He stopped near the east entrance and leaned against the wall for a moment with his eyes closed, just breathing, just being a person in a building for a few seconds, instead of a variable in someone else's problem. He thought about Mia. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to Mrs. Garland. "Running late? Everything fine. Tell Mia I'll be there before she's asleep." Mrs. Garland responded in about 40 seconds. "She already fell asleep on the couch. Take your time. She's fine." He looked at that message for a long moment, then he put the phone away and went back inside. By 10:20, Isabella had reached 4 of the 6 board members. He stood near enough to hear her side of the conversations without trying to, and what he heard was a version of Isabella Carter he hadn't seen in the hallway or the meeting room, direct in a different way, stripped of the performance of authority, just someone telling the truth about a bad situation and asking people who had known her for years to hold their position until she could prove what she was telling them. The 4th call was the hardest. He could tell by the way she held the phone, the angle of her shoulders, the specific quality of her silences during the other person's replies. "I understand your position," she said at one point. "I'm asking you to hold it for 24 hours. Not because you owe me, but because what I'm telling you is verifiable, and if you act before it's verified, you're going to end up on the wrong side of this." Pause. "Yes." Longer pause. "I know what it looks like. That's why I need the time." Pause. "Thank you." She ended the call and stood holding the phone for a moment before she turned around. 4 of 6, she said. The other 2 went to voicemail, which might mean they already heard from Victor's side. "Or they're at dinner," Claire said. "Let's hope it's dinner." Nathan came over. "What did you tell them?" "The truth. That Victor compromised the convoy, that someone tried to remove me from the building tonight, that I'm safe and working on documentation." She paused. "I didn't mention you." "Good. Not because—" she started. "I know," he said. "It's cleaner that way." She studied him. "You're not insulted." "Why would I be insulted?" "Because I left you out of it. You're protecting your position and keeping the story simple. That's the right call." He said it flatly, without any edge to it, and watched something in her expression adjust. She wasn't used to people who didn't need to be the thing she said about them. He recognized that. It was the kind of thing you learned about people who'd spent a long time surrounded by others who needed credit in order to function. Torres called at 10:47. "Lot's been cleared," he said, "but not well. They left 2 sedans registered to a leasing company that traces back to a Meridian Tactical Group subsidiary. I got photos, plates, everything. Also found a comm device near the fence line. One of the men you put down must have dropped it in the dark. It's still in one piece." A pause. "There's something else." "Tell me." 2 of Victor's regular security team were locked in a storage unit on the south side of the property. They're okay. Dehydrated, not happy, but they're okay. He told them they were being reassigned and then had them detained. He replaced them with Cross's people. Nathan exhaled. They refused to go along with it. Based on what they're saying, they weren't even asked. Victor just removed them from the situation. Get them medical and get their statements. Everything documented. Time, location, what they were told, how long they were held. Already on it. Torres paused. "Nathan, this is a serious play. Cross has been building this for months. I know. You sure you don't want to bring in someone with a badge?" Nathan looked across the concourse at Isabella, who was standing with Claire reviewing something on the tablet. "Not yet. We need our documentation solid before this becomes official. Once it's in front of the wrong person, it disappears." "Understood," Torres said. "Give me another hour." The call ended, and Nathan stood with the phone in his hand and thought about the 2 security officers locked in a storage unit on the south side of the property. People who had said no to something and been removed for it. People who had, without fanfare and without any particular recognition, drawn a line. He thought about lines, and where you drew them, and what it cost. At 11:10, Victor Hale called Isabella's cell phone. She looked at the screen and then at Nathan. He said, "Answer it. Don't tell him where you are. Let him talk." She put it on speaker and answered. "Isabella." Victor's voice was different now. The professional warmth was gone, replaced by something more careful and more honest, which somehow made it worse. I'm glad you're safe. Are you? She said. I need you to listen to me. Whatever you think happened tonight, I know what happened tonight, Victor. A beat. Things are more complicated than they look from where you're standing. Explain them to me then. Another beat, longer this time. That's not a conversation for the phone. Then we don't have a conversation, she said. What do you want? I want you to come in, not to cross, to me. Neutral location, just the two of us, and I explain everything. He paused. I made decisions I can't take back. But I didn't want anyone hurt. That was never the plan. Tell that to your two officers you locked in a storage unit, she said. The silence on the other end lasted long enough to confirm that she'd scored something real. How? Victor started. Good night, Victor. She ended the call. Her hand was steady. Her face was less so, but only for a moment. He didn't know about the storage unit, Nathan said, or he didn't know we knew. He didn't know about a lot of things, she said quietly. He built this whole operation assuming I'd panic, that I'd go along with whatever Cross wanted just to make it stop. She set the phone down on the bench beside her. He's worked with me for 2 years, and that's what he concluded. Nathan didn't say anything. Is that what I'm like? She asked. Not defensively, genuinely. Is that the impression I give, that I'll break under pressure? I watched you lock yourself in a vehicle in a dark lot and argue with a man who had 6 armed people with him, Nathan said. I don't think breaking under pressure is your problem. She looked at him. What is my problem? He considered the honest answer and decided she was the kind of person who could handle it. You assume the people around you are extensions of your systems, that if you pay them right and position them correctly, they'll perform the function you need. He paused. They're not systems. They're people. People get offers. People get afraid. People get tired of feeling like a function. She was quiet for a long moment. Is that what you felt when you worked here? I've been here 8 months. I repair equipment and drive vehicles. Nobody knew my name before tonight. He said it without bitterness, just accurately. That's its own answer. She looked down at the floor between them. The concourse noise moved around them, indifferent and constant, the way public space always was. I'm not good at people, she said. I've always been better at systems. She paused, looking for the word. Predictable. You build them right, they do what you designed them to do. People are harder, he said. People are much harder. She looked at him. You're harder than anything I've built. He wasn't sure what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. Your daughter, she said. What's she like? The question came from a different direction than he'd expected. He let himself think about Mia for a moment. Her voice on the phone at 5:30, the dog named Captain, the drawing of something that was all legs and excitement, and the total commitment of an 8-year-old to a thing that didn't exist yet. She's like nobody I've ever met, he said, absolutely certain about things. Very specific opinions about what dog names are acceptable. Wants to grow up to be either a marine biologist or someone who makes videos about cooking. She hasn't decided. Isabella made the small surprise sound again, the almost laugh. Those are very different careers. She's keeping her options open. Smart kid. She gets it from her mother, Nathan said, and then the mention of it sat in the air for a second, and he let it. Isabella didn't ask. She just nodded, once, accepting the shape of a thing without needing its details. He was grateful for that. Wren touched Nathan's arm at 11:30 and said quietly, We've got someone outside the north entrance. He's been standing in the same position for 12 minutes, which is too long for someone waiting for a train. Nathan stood. Description. 40s, dark jacket, right hand in his pocket. He's looking at the entrance more than the street. 1? That I've seen. Could be more. He thought about the layout of Westport Station. 4 entrances, 2 levels, the escalators between them, the camera coverage, the staff positions. Then he thought about Victor, who knew how Nathan thought, and knew he would go somewhere public and lit, and had presumably been thinking for the last 2 hours about which public and lit place a man like Nathan would choose. We need to move, he said. Where? Isabella asked, already on her feet. He thought about it for exactly 4 seconds, which was as long as he could afford. There's a hospital 3 blocks east, St. Angeline Medical Center. I need someone to look at this arm anyway, and hospitals have security, cameras, and enough foot traffic that approach is difficult. He paused. Also, one of the board members you called. Does any of them have a legal background? Marcus Webb, she said immediately. Former corporate attorney before he joined the board. Why? Because we need someone with the authority to begin formal proceedings against Victor and Cross, and we need that moving before midnight. Once this becomes a legal matter on record, the options for making it disappear get significantly smaller. Isabella looked at him steadily. You're not just getting me out of a bad situation, she said. You're building the case. I'm trying to, he said. I don't know corporate law. You do. I know enough. She picked up her jacket. Call Marcus Webb? Call Marcus Webb, he said. They moved toward the south exit. Ren ahead, Claire close to Isabella, Nathan covering the rear and watching the concourse behind them with the particular attention of someone who had spent years understanding what it meant when something didn't add up. The man in the dark jacket at the north entrance never saw them leave. Outside, the city was cold and ordinary in the way cities were when you came back to them from somewhere terrible, unchanged, unhurried, continuing its enormous and different life around the small and urgent fact of what had just happened to 3 people inside it. Nathan pressed the bandage on his arm and kept moving. His shoulder ached. His feet were wrong for this kind of night. Somewhere across the city, Mrs. Garland's couch held a sleeping 8-year-old who had drawn a dog named Captain and fallen asleep waiting for her father. He kept that in mind. It helped. St. Angeline Medical Center at 11:30 on a Friday night was the particular kind of controlled chaos that hospitals reserved for the hours after the city stopped pretending it was civilized. The waiting area held a man with a wrapped hand, 2 college-aged women supporting a third between them, and a family of 4 arranged around a child who'd stopped crying and graduated to the blank-eyed quiet of exhaustion. Nobody looked at Nathan's arm with any particular alarm, which told him the triage nurse had seen worse in the last hour. He sat in a plastic chair while a young resident named Patel cleaned and closed the gash with 6 stitches and surgical tape, and he answered the standard questions. How did this happen? When did it happen? Is there anything else? With the economy of someone who had answered medical questions under field conditions and knew exactly how much information was necessary. You should have come in sooner, Patel said. I was busy, Nathan said. Patel looked at him with the expression of a man who had heard that sentence more times than he could count and had stopped finding it remarkable. Any other injuries I should know about? Shoulder, right side. It's not structural, just impact. Patel checked it. His hands were quick and practiced. Soft tissue. You'll be stiff for a week. Ice, ibuprofen, don't lift anything heavy. Understood. You're not going to do any of that, are you? Probably not tonight, Nathan said. Patel closed his kit and looked at Nathan's face for a moment with the particular attention of someone who had learned to read the people in front of him beyond their injuries. He didn't ask anything else. He just wrote something on a discharge form and said, "Front desk has the paperwork," and moved on to the next patient. Nathan pressed the new bandage on his arm, tested the shoulder with a slow rotation that confirmed Patel's assessment, and went to find Isabella. She was in a family waiting area off the main corridor, a small room with chairs in a square, and a table, and bad lighting, and a framed print of a coastal scene that was supposed to be calming and mostly just looked like somewhere nobody had ever actually been. She'd found a phone charger from somewhere, which Claire was using. Marcus Webb was on speaker on Isabella's cell phone, his voice carrying the low, deliberate pace of a man who thought in careful increments and had been doing it for 30 years. The documentation from the internal logs is your strongest piece, Webb was saying when Nathan entered. The export timestamp, the external address, the access to the emergency protocols, that's a clear breach of fiduciary duty and likely criminal computer fraud. The comm device Torres recovered, and the vehicle registrations trace back to Cross, which gives us the connection we need for a conspiracy claim. What about the 2 security officers? Isabella asked. Their detention is its own matter. Unlawful imprisonment, minimum. But for the board proceeding, their testimony corroborates the internal evidence. Victor removed loyal personnel specifically to execute this. That's premeditated. How long before we can bring this formally? If I draft the emergency injunction tonight and file first thing tomorrow, we have Cross's acquisition attempt frozen within 24 hours. The board can't act on any motion he's introduced while the injunction is in place. A pause. Isabella, I need you somewhere I can reach you, not a hospital waiting room. I'm working on that. Work faster. Cross will have his own legal team moving as soon as he realizes tonight's plan is compromised. Speed is the only advantage we have right now. I understand. And Isabella, I need to say this clearly because it matters. Whatever you decide to do about the person who helped you tonight, make sure you do it before this becomes a public proceeding. Once the lawyers are in the room, gratitude gets complicated. She looked at Nathan across the small room. Noted, she said. Webb signed off, and the room was quiet for a moment except for the distant hospital sounds that bled through the walls. A cart moving down a hallway, a voice from an overhead speaker, the low mechanical hum of a building that never slept. He's right, Nathan said. You need a secure location. I know. She set the phone on the table and pressed her fingers against her eyes for a moment. A genuinely tired gesture, the kind that happened when you stopped performing for a few seconds. I have an apartment that Cross doesn't know about. I bought it 2 years ago under a property management LLC. It was supposed to be an investment. Does Victor know about it? She thought about it. No, it never appeared in any company document. He had access to my schedule, my personal calendar, my home address, but not the LLC. Then that's where we go, Nathan said. We, she repeated. Not challenging, just noting the word. Until we know Cross's team isn't still looking, yes. She held his gaze for a moment. You realize you've now spent approximately 6 hours protecting a woman you have no contractual obligation to protect, with a laceration on your arm and a bruised shoulder when you were supposed to be home by 9. I'm aware of the math, he said. And Mrs. Garland said Mia's asleep, so the math works out for tonight. Something moved across Isabella's face. Not a smile exactly, but the shape of one. The involuntary softening that happened when something landed in the middle of where your defenses weren't. Let's go, she said. Torres met them outside the hospital at midnight with the comm device and the photos from the Port District lot packaged on a portable drive, and the 2 recovered security officers, men named Garza and Pollack, who had been checked by a paramedic friend of Torres's, and were now sitting in the back of a rented SUV looking exhausted and angry in the specific way of people who had been put in a room against their will and were just now processing what that meant. Nathan shook their hands. You doing okay? Garza was in his mid-30s, compact, with the cropped posture of someone who took his work seriously. Better than I was 2 hours ago, he said. What's the play? We need written statements from both of you. Everything. What Victor told you, when, how you ended up in that storage unit, how long you were there, specific times if you have them. He paused. Can you do that tonight? Yeah, Garza said. He looked past Nathan toward where Isabella was standing near the vehicle. She okay? She's fine. Victor, Garza started, and then stopped, and the thing he didn't say took up a lot of space. He and Pollack exchanged the look of 2 people who had worked under someone and believed in them and were now rearranging everything they understood about that trust. I know, Nathan said. He didn't try to add to it. Pollack, who hadn't spoken yet, looked at Nathan's arm. You're the maintenance guy, he said. Not unkindly, more like someone completing a sentence they'd started internally. From the building. That's right. Pollack nodded slowly. Victor said you were going to be a problem. Nathan looked at him. When did he say that? This afternoon, before the convoy. He called me and Garza in and told us there was going to be a facilities worker riding along in the backup vehicle, and he wanted us to keep him out of the way. Pollack paused. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. Victor didn't manage things that specific unless he was managing something he didn't want us to see. Nathan filed that away. The fact that Victor had identified him as a variable before the convoy even formed, which meant Victor had been watching the hallway, had heard or been told about the exchange and had made a decision about Nathan that confirmed how seriously he'd taken the warning. The irony of that took a moment to arrive. The very thing Isabella had dismissed as insignificant had been significant enough to Victor Hale that he'd made contingency plans around it. "Get the statements written," Nathan said. "Claire Morgan will coordinate getting them to Marcus Webb tonight." The apartment was on the 14th floor of a building in the Caldwell district, which was the kind of neighborhood that wasn't quite upscale and wasn't quite not. Wide streets, older construction with good bones, the kind of place where people lived rather than performed living. The LLC had it registered as a corporate residential property, and nothing in the building's records connected it to Isabella Carter directly. It was clean and sparsely furnished, the way investment properties usually were. Functional couch, bed with good sheets, a kitchen with decent appliances, and nothing in it. Isabella moved through the space with the slight stiffness of someone who hadn't been there in a while, turning on lights, checking the windows, doing the private inventory of a place that was hers, but not familiar in the way a home was familiar. Wren did a check of the building entrance and stairwells while Nathan stood at the window and looked at the street below. Quiet. Nothing parked in the wrong place, nobody occupying a doorway for too long. "Clear," Wren said when she came back. She looked at Nathan. "I'll take the lobby. Torres is on the street. We've got it until morning." "Thank you," he said. "Both of you." She nodded once and left, and then it was Nathan and Isabella and Claire in the apartment, and Claire was already cross-legged on the couch with the tablet, coordinating the transfer of documentation to Marcus Webb's office, and the space had the strange compressed quality of the hours after something terrible when you've stopped moving and the night has settled around you. Isabella came out of the kitchen with 2 glasses of water and handed one to Nathan without asking. He drank half of it standing up. "Sit down," she said. "You're listing to one side." "I'm not listing. Your right shoulder is about 2 inches lower than your left." He sat down in the chair near the window. She sat on the edge of the couch, close enough to Claire to see the screen, but far enough to have her own silence. She drank her water. The apartment's heating clicked on with a soft mechanical sound. "Cross is going to move tonight," Nathan said. "He knows the convoy failed. He knows you've had time to make contact. His legal team is going to be building something." "Marcus is faster," Isabella said. "He's been doing this for 30 years and he still does his own drafting. Cross's people will use associates." "You trust Webb?" "Completely. He's the one board member who was never going to be bought because he never needed anything from anyone. He made his money before he joined the board and he's genuinely uninterested in making more." She paused. "He's also the one who called me 3 months ago and told me I needed to pay more attention to the people around me." Nathan looked at her. 3 months ago. "He didn't name Victor. He said he'd been watching the security department and he had a feeling something wasn't right. I told him I'd look into it." She looked at the water in her glass. "I put it on my list and I didn't get to it." The admission sat in the room without her trying to soften it. Nathan respected that. Some people, when they admitted a mistake, immediately started building a case for why it was understandable, why anyone would have done the same. Isabella just set it down and left it there. "Cross would have found another way eventually," Nathan said. "Maybe, but I handed him the timeline." She looked up. "I want to be honest about that, especially to you." He wasn't sure what to do with that, so he just nodded. "Tell me about the trap," she said. He looked at her. "Which part?" "Victor. You said something in Westport Station, that we needed our story in place before his was. You were already thinking about how to force a confession." "Not a confession. Exposure." He shifted in the chair, testing the shoulder. "Victor thinks he has options. He doesn't yet know how much documentation we have, or that we found Garza and Pollack. He's constructing a version of events that positions tonight as a security failure rather than a conspiracy. Something he can control and reframe. If he believes there's still an out for him, he'll reach for it." "And if he reaches for it publicly," Isabella said slowly, "he exposes himself." "Right. He's going to try to contact you again. He's going to try to negotiate. Not because he's contrite, but because he thinks he can still shape the outcome." Nathan paused. "When he does, we need him to do it somewhere that can be recorded and witnessed. Not on the phone this time. In person." Isabella was quiet for a moment. You want to use me as bait. I want to use your conversation as evidence. There's a difference. Not a very comfortable one. No, he said. It's not. She turned the water glass in her hands, looking at it. If I agree to meet him and he says the wrong things, he's going to say the wrong things. He's already started. Nathan leaned forward. That call tonight, he said it wasn't supposed to be about hurting anyone. He said things were complicated. He was already positioning himself as someone who was in over his head rather than someone who designed the operation. That's a man building a defense, and a man building a defense will keep talking if he thinks it's helping. You know this from experience, she said. I've sat across from people who thought they were managing a conversation, he said. They almost never are. She set the glass down. When? Tomorrow morning. Let him come to you. Don't reach out first. That makes it look like you want something from him. Let him call, and when he does, tell him you're willing to hear him out. Name a place that's semi-public, a hotel lobby, a restaurant at a quiet hour, somewhere with cameras and enough people that he can't do anything physical but private enough that he'll feel comfortable talking. And you'll be where? Close enough to hear everything. She looked at him for a long moment. You know the strange thing? She said. I've had security consultants charge me $600 an hour who gave me less useful analysis than you just did. They were probably better at the invoice, he said. This time the laugh came fully. Not long, but real. The kind that surprised the person making it. Claire looked up from the tablet briefly, registered the sound, and went back to her screen. I'll need formal clothes, Isabella said, getting back to practicalities. And I don't want Claire in the room when Victor talks. He'll perform for an audience. Agreed. And I want it on record. Whatever he says, I want it documented in a way that can be used. Marcus will know how to handle the admissibility. I'll talk to Torres about equipment tonight. She nodded. Then she said, almost to herself, Victor's going to tell himself that what he did made sense, that I gave him reasons. People always build a story where they're a reasonable person who made a reasonable choice. Does that make you angrier? Nathan asked. That he has a story? She thought about it. No, she said after a moment. It makes me sad, because it means he was never going to be someone I could have kept, no matter what I'd done differently. She paused. You can't build a system that accounts for someone who's already decided you're the obstacle. Nathan was quiet. Is that what happened with your unit? She asked. The people giving orders, they'd decided something? They decided the mission was more important than the people on it, he said. And that's not always wrong. Sometimes it's right. But when you make that calculation badly, when you send people into something you know is compromised because the alternative is admitting you made a mistake, then you're not making a command decision anymore. You're protecting yourself. And people died. 3 people died, he said, on a mission that should have been aborted 2 days earlier. She absorbed that carefully. Did you go after anyone for it? I left, he said. That was all I could do that didn't require becoming something I didn't want to be. And Mia? He looked at her. Was she the reason you stopped? Isabella said. Or the reason you could? He thought about it honestly, the way he rarely let himself. Both, he said. She gave me a reason to be someone different, and she made it easier to walk away, because walking away to something is different from just walking away. Isabella nodded slowly. I've been walking away from things my whole life, she said. Jobs, cities, people. I thought I was building towards something. I'm not entirely sure I wasn't just staying in motion. You built a $4 billion company. I built a system, she said. Marcus told me that too, in a different way. He said I was very good at creating structures and very poor at inhabiting them. She looked at the window. I think what he meant was that I built things I could manage from a distance because proximity made me uncomfortable. She paused. People at a distance are easier. You see what they produce, not what they are. Like a maintenance worker, Nathan said. She looked at him directly. Yes, she said. Exactly like that. Come on. Victor called at 7:41 the next morning. Isabella was awake. She'd slept 3 hours on the apartment couch, which Nathan knew because he'd been on the chair by the window most of the night, the shoulder making sleep more theoretical than practical. Claire had taken the bed and emerged at 6:30 looking more functional than either of them, which Nathan suspected was a practiced skill rather than a natural gift. Torres had come up at 5 with recording equipment and instructions from Webb's office on what constituted admissible conversation under the relevant statutes. Nathan had listened to all of it and then asked Torres to explain the 3 parts that mattered most and ignore the rest. When Victor's name appeared on Isabella's screen, she looked at Nathan and he nodded, and she answered. Victor. Isabella? He sounded like a man who hadn't slept either, which was something. I need to see you. I know. A pause. You're willing? I said I know you need to see me. That's not the same thing as willing. Her voice was even, controlled. The meeting room voice, but quieter. Tell me what you want to say first. I can't say it on the phone. Then give me a reason to meet you. A long pause. Because what Cross told you about the plan isn't the whole truth. And if you go into that boardroom with only his version of events, you're going to be handed a settlement that's worse than you think. Nathan watched her face. She'd expected something, an apology, a justification, an appeal to their working relationship. She hadn't expected him to lead with information as leverage. He could see her recalibrating. Where? She said. Somewhere public, Victor said. I'm not... He stopped. I don't want it to look like I'm approaching you privately. Not after last night. The Meridian Hotel lobby, she said. 10th and Commerce, 9 o'clock. I'll be there. She ended the call and looked at Nathan. He said, Cross told me something. He thinks you've talked to Cross directly, Nathan said. He doesn't know where your information came from. He's trying to figure out what you know by offering to correct it. He's going to tell me Cross oversold what he promised, she said slowly. He's going to position himself as someone who was given a false picture. And in doing that, Nathan said, he's going to confirm the picture. Set. The Meridian Hotel lobby at 9 on a Saturday morning was the right level of occupied. A handful of guests checking out, 2 people with laptops at the seating area near the windows, a concierge desk with steady but manageable traffic. Nathan was at a corner table with a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking, wearing a jacket that wasn't his work jacket, with an earpiece Torres had procured that was smaller than anything the company's own security team used. Isabella came in at 2 minutes to 9. She'd found clothes in a bag she kept at the apartment, dark trousers, a gray jacket, the kind of outfit that said she'd had time to prepare without saying she'd had time to prepare. She looked composed in the way that cost something, and Nathan, watching her cross the lobby, understood that composure was its own form of courage, the daily kind that didn't get named. Victor arrived at 9 exactly. He was in the same clothes he'd been wearing the night before, with a jacket pulled over them, and he looked like a man who had spent the night making decisions and wasn't settled on any of them. He sat across from Isabella at the table she'd chosen, a quiet corner, not isolated, with enough ambient noise to make them feel private. Nathan was close enough to see their faces and hear through the earpiece that Torres had paired to a microphone in the pen on Isabella's table. Victor didn't waste time. Cross told me the operation was going to be clean, he said. An interruption, not a removal. He said you'd be detained overnight, the board would convene an emergency session, and by the time you returned, the motion would already be in progress. He said nobody was going to be hurt, and you'd be back in your building within 18 hours. And you believed him, Isabella said. I needed to believe him. He said it with a rawness that Nathan hadn't heard in his voice before. Not in the hallway. Not on the phone call. Isabella, you know what you pay me. You know what Cross offered. You know I've got 2 kids starting college in 3 years and a mother in a memory care facility that costs $9,000 a month. I know all of that, she said quietly, and you never once, he stopped. You never asked. In 2 years, you knew what I was dealing with and you never asked. Is that why? She said. Because I didn't ask? No. He pressed his hands flat on the table. No. It's because I let myself get tired, and Cross found me when I was tired, and I told myself that what he was planning wasn't going to really hurt you. That you'd lose the company, yeah, but you'd walk away with a settlement and you'd build something else because you always build something else. He paused. I didn't plan for you to be in real danger. The people he brought in, he told me they were there for show. I didn't know he'd pulled Garza and Pollock until it was already moving. But you knew the route was wrong, Isabella said. Yes. You knew the convoy wasn't going to Harborview. Yes. And you let it go anyway. The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. Victor looked at his hands. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said. I'm asking you to understand that Cross gave me a picture, and the picture was a lie. And whatever he's telling you now about what he planned is also a lie. He looked up. He wanted you gone, Isabella. Not just from the board vote, gone. Whatever he told you his intentions were, they weren't what I was told. He hasn't told me anything, she said. I haven't spoken to Cross. Victor stared at her. But you said I knew what you wanted. That's all. She held his gaze. Everything I know about last night, I know from evidence. The shell account, the payments, the export logs, the comm device from the lot, the vehicles registered to Meridian Tactical. The color changed in Victor's face. Not dramatically, just a shift, the kind that happened when someone realized the room they thought they were navigating was a different room entirely. Garza and Pollock are alive, she said. They gave statements last night. A pause. And this conversation is being recorded. Victor sat very still. I'm not the police, Isabella said. What happens next isn't my decision to make, but what happens at the board is. And what you just told me about what Cross said to you, what he promised, what he concealed, that's going to matter when a judge decides who bears the greater liability for what happened in that lot. She wasn't offering him a deal. Nathan could hear it clearly. She wasn't transacting. She was just telling him the truth about the shape of the situation, the way she probably should have been telling people the truth about situations for years and hadn't. Victor said after a long moment, What do you want me to do? I want you to tell Marcus Webb everything you told me, she said, and I want it in writing, signed before noon. And after that? After that, she said, is after that. Quote. Victor signed the statement at 11:47 in Marcus Webb's office, with a lawyer present who Victor had called and who had taken one look at the documentation Claire provided and advised his client to cooperate fully. Damian Cross's acquisition motion was frozen by emergency injunction at 2:15 that afternoon, 2 hours before the board session he'd scheduled was supposed to begin. Cross's legal team filed a counter motion at 3 o'clock, which Webb had anticipated and had a pre-drafted response to, which was filed at 3:14. Nathan knew the timeline because Isabella texted him updates from Webb's office, short and factual. No commentary. He was at Mrs. Garland's house by noon, sitting on the couch while Mia told him in considerable detail about a documentary she'd watched about octopuses. He had ice on his shoulder and Mrs. Garland had made coffee, and he was trying to listen to the octopus information with the full attention it deserved while also watching the texts come in from across the city. Injunction confirmed. Counter motion filed. Board session postponed pending legal review. That's a win. And then, an hour later, Victor's statement names Cross directly in the original planning. Webb says it changes the criminal exposure significantly. And then, at 4:30, it's over. For today, at least. Nathan set the phone down and looked at Mia, who was explaining that octopuses had 3 hearts and blue blood, and he should know that in case it ever came up. 3 hearts, he said. That's a lot. It's because of how they evolved, she said, with the authority of someone who had watched a 90-minute documentary and retained all of it. They need extra pumping capacity. Makes sense, he said. She looked at his arm. What happened there? Work thing. It's fine. It doesn't look fine. It's stitched up. The doctor said it was fine. She studied him with the specific skepticism of an 8-year-old who had learned that adults said things were fine as a general policy rather than a factual report. Does it hurt? A little, he said. Not much. She seemed to accept this. She leaned against his good side, the warm weight of her, and turned back to her tablet where the documentary was still paused. Can we watch the rest? Yeah, he said. Let's watch the rest. He put his arm around her and didn't think about the Port District or Westport Station or the Meridian Hotel lobby for about 40 minutes, which was the longest stretch of not thinking about it he'd had since 6:53 the previous evening, and it felt, in the simple and physical way that relief always felt, like exactly enough. His phone buzzed one more time at 5 o'clock, a number he recognized now. I'd like to call you tonight, if that's all right. There are things I should have said differently, not about the company. He read it twice. Then he typed back, after 8. She goes to bed at 8. The response was immediate. After 8. He set the phone down on the cushion beside him, and Mia unpaused the documentary, and an octopus moved across a coral reef in colors that didn't seem like they belonged to the real world. And outside the windows of Mrs. Garland's house, the city did what it always did, which was continue without particular concern for what anyone inside it had just survived. Isabella called at 8:17. Mia had gone to bed at 8:05, which was 7 minutes later than usual, because she'd wanted to show Nathan one more segment of the octopus documentary. The part about how they changed color not just for camouflage, but for communication, expressing things they had no other way to say. He'd watched it with her and thought, without intending to, that there was something in that worth sitting with. Then he turned off her light and stood in the hallway outside her door for a moment, the way he sometimes did, just listening to the quiet of a child settling into sleep, which was one of the most ordinary sounds in the world, and also, depending on the day, one of the most necessary. He was in the kitchen with a glass of water and the particular stillness of a house after a child goes quiet, when his phone rang. "I wasn't sure you'd still be up," Isabella said. "I'm up." He leaned against the counter. "How did the rest of the afternoon go?" Webb filed 3 additional motions between 4 and 6. Cross's team responded to one of them and ignored the other 2, which Webb says means they're thinner than they're projecting. A pause. "The board chair called me at 6:30. He'd been briefed by Webb. He used the word shaken, which is not a word I've ever heard him use." "What did he say?" "He said he'd received a call from Cross's people at 11 last night requesting an emergency session, and he'd been about to convene it when Webb reached him at midnight." She paused. "He said he was 40 minutes from making a decision that would have been catastrophic. But he didn't. But he didn't." A longer pause. "Because I got out of a car in a dark lot and ran 6 blocks in the wrong shoes and made it to a phone in time." She said it without drama, just the facts of it, but underneath was something he recognized, the particular vertigo of understanding how close something had come to going the other way. "You made the calls," he said. "You kept it together long enough to make the calls." "With considerable assistance." "Yeah," he said, "with considerable assistance." She was quiet for a moment on the other end, and he could hear what sounded like a window being opened somewhere, the ambient shift of outside air entering a room. "I'm at the apartment," she said, "the Caldwell one. I didn't want to go home tonight." "That's sensible." "I've been sitting here for 2 hours thinking about what I want to say to you, and I keep arriving at versions that sound either too formal or too much." A pause. "Which is apparently what happens when I try to be honest about something personal. I revert to boardroom." "Just say it," he said. She took a breath. "I owe you an apology that has nothing to do with tonight." He waited. "In that hallway," she said. "What I said. The way I said it. I knew it landed badly the moment it came out, and I let it stand anyway because I was busy and you were in a category that I wasn't paying attention to. And I've been in this industry long enough to know that's exactly how the bad decisions happen. Not with malice, with inattention." She paused. "You told me the strongest system fails when you trust the wrong people, and what you actually meant, I think, was that I was trusting my systems more than the people in them. And you were right. And I dismissed you in front of a room full of people who were already going to forget your name by morning." Nathan was quiet for a moment. Outside his kitchen window, the neighbor's porch light was on, making a small orange circle in the dark. "I wasn't looking for an apology," he said. "I know, that's partly why I'm giving one." He thought about what to say. He'd had the apology, in a sense, since the moment she'd gotten out of the car in that lot when she had every reason not to trust him. That was its own form of acknowledgement, and it had meant more than words in a hallway would have. But she needed to say this, and he understood that, and so he let her. "Accepted," he said, genuinely. "Thank you." A pause. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "When you were in the stairwell, after I dismissed you, you said you sat on a step for a minute." She said it as a statement, not quite a question. He'd mentioned it briefly during one of the long stretches in Westport Station when they'd been filling silence with the honest accounting of how the night had unfolded. "What were you thinking about?" "Mia," he said. "Mostly." Not about what I'd said? For about 30 seconds. Then Mia. He paused. She has a way of reordering priorities. Even when something's gone wrong. Especially then. He leaned his shoulder, the good one, against the cabinet. When everything else is loud, she's the thing I can still hear clearly. What she needs, what I owe her, whether I'm doing right by her. Everything else sorts around that. That must be... Isabella started, and then stopped, and he heard something in the stop that was more than a search for the right word. I don't have anything like that, she said after a moment. A fixed point. I've built my whole life around things that move. Revenue, market position, the next acquisition, the next expansion. Everything always pointing forward toward the next thing. A pause. I thought that was ambition. I'm starting to think it might also have been fear. Fear of what? Of stopping, she said, of being still long enough to find out what's actually there. He didn't have an easy answer for that, and he didn't reach for one. What did you find out? He asked. Tonight, when you were stopped. She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might not answer. That I've been building protection systems for 15 years, she said, and I've never let anyone actually close enough to protect me. Another pause. And that the one person who walked through a fence to do it anyway was someone I'd written off in about 4 seconds. Nathan looked at the orange circle of the neighbor's porch light. I'm not writing it off now, she said. I want you to know that. I know, he said. Ushan. The legal proceedings took 11 weeks. Not 11 weeks of daily crisis. Most of it was paperwork and depositions and the grinding procedural machinery of corporate law working through the evidence that Claire and Torres and Webb's team had assembled in the hours after the Port District lot. Nathan wasn't central to most of it. He gave a deposition in Webb's office on a Tuesday morning in November, answering questions about what he'd observed on the 32nd floor and what he'd done afterward, and the attorney conducting it kept looking at him with the expression of someone trying to reconcile the job title on the witness form, Facilities Maintenance Technician, with the account being given. Damian Cross's legal team fought hard and expensively for 6 weeks and then settled in the 7th, when the criminal referral for conspiracy and unlawful detention landed on a desk at the district attorney's office, and Cross's personal attorney apparently had a frank conversation with his client about the difference between civil exposure and the other kind. The settlement terms were sealed, but Marcus Webb called Isabella after it was signed and used the word comprehensive, which she told Nathan about that evening over the phone, and which he understood to mean she'd gotten most of what she wanted. Victor Hale cooperated fully with both the civil proceedings and the criminal investigation, as he'd said he would. His cooperation reduced his own exposure significantly, but didn't eliminate it. He lost his position, his security certifications, and a portion of the money Cross had paid him to a civil judgment. What happened after that was between Victor and whatever he was going to build from the remaining pieces. And Nathan didn't spend much time thinking about it, because thinking about it didn't change it, and there were other things that needed his attention. Brett Salas, the ops coordinator who'd exported the convoy route, was terminated and referred for criminal prosecution separately. He'd been younger than Nathan expected when he saw his photo, 26, with the particular look of someone who had made a calculation about what opportunities were available to him and had been wrong about which kind he was being offered. Nathan thought about that sometimes, the way desperation and ambition could look identical from the inside, until they didn't. Chat. In December, 3 weeks before the legal proceedings formally concluded, Isabella asked Nathan to meet her for coffee. Not at Carter Security's building, not at any of the places that had become connected, in the short and intense history of their acquaintance, to crisis or strategy or the machinery of keeping bad things from getting worse. She chose a coffee shop on a side street in the Caldwell district, 4 blocks from the apartment, a narrow place with mismatched chairs and a counter that needed repainting and very good coffee. She was already there when Nathan arrived, sitting at a corner table with both hands around a cup, wearing a coat he hadn't seen before and looking, in the winter light coming through the front window, like a person rather than a position. He got a coffee and sat across from her. "How's Mia?" she asked. "She convinced me to get the dog," he said. Isabella looked at him. "Captain?" "Captain," he confirmed. "He's a 3-year-old beagle mix from the rescue shelter on Route 9. He has one ear that goes up and one ear that doesn't, and Mia has decided this is a feature rather than a defect. She's right, Isabella said. It's distinctive. She's been calling it his character, he said, which I suspect she heard from a teacher. Isabella smiled, not the almost smile or the surprised laugh, but a full and unguarded thing that changed the geometry of her face into something younger than her professional presentation suggested. He'd seen it a few times now, in the weeks since the night at the Port District lot, and he hadn't gotten used to it exactly, but he'd stopped being surprised by it. I want to talk to you about something, she said, wrapping both hands back around the cup. All right. I've been rebuilding the security department for the past 6 weeks, she said, from the ground up. New protocols, new personnel structure, new reporting lines. Claire's been managing the transition, and she's been remarkable, actually. She knew half of what was wrong before I did, and she just kept showing up. A pause. I'm making her chief operating officer in January. She doesn't know yet. She'll be good at it, Nathan said, and meant it. She will. Isabella looked at her coffee. The security director position is open. It's going to be rebuilt around a different philosophy than the one Victor was running. Less hierarchy, more transparency, direct reporting to me and to the board simultaneously. Whoever takes it needs to understand that it's not a ceremonial role. She looked up. I want to offer it to you. Nathan had expected something in this direction. Not exactly this, but something. He'd had time to think about it. Tell me what it actually means, he said. Not the title. The day. She nodded as if she'd been waiting for that question specifically. You'd oversee all physical and operational security across the company. Personnel, protocols, threat assessment, convoy operations, executive protection when needed. You'd have direct authority to flag concerns to the board without going through my office first. That's new. It's written into the structure. And you'd have input on vendor relationships and system design, because I've finally understood that the people closest to the systems know more about their weaknesses than the people who bought them. You're describing a substantial job, he said. It's a substantial position, she said. I won't pretend it's small because it isn't, and you'd see through that anyway. He looked at his coffee for a moment. I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. All right. Is this because of what I did that night? He said it without accusation. Because I need to know whether you're offering me this because you believe I'm the right person for it, or because you feel like you owe me something. She held his gaze. Both, she said. And I'm going to explain why that's not a contradiction. He waited. What you did that night demonstrated a specific set of capabilities that I now understand my security department needs and has never had, she said. The ability to read a room before anything goes wrong. The discipline to act on incomplete information without overreacting. The judgment to know which risks are worth taking and which ones aren't. She paused. Those are not things I can hire from a resume. I've been trying to hire them from resumes for 15 years, and last October I found out exactly how well that works. Another pause. So yes, I know who you are because of what you did. But what I know is professional. The offer is professional. And the other part? He said. The owing. She didn't look away. I'm not offering you this because I feel guilty. I'm offering it because I've spent 11 weeks trying to find someone who can do what you do, and I keep coming back to the fact that the person I need is someone I already know. She paused. The guilt is separate. I've been carrying it separately, and I've been trying to pay it down in other ways. What ways? She looked slightly uncomfortable, which was a rarer expression on her than he'd expected when he first met her. I spoke to the facilities director about your tenure here. Before all of this, 8 months of consistent work, no complaints, 2 commendations in the maintenance log that nobody had apparently bothered to surface to anyone above his level. A pause. I asked him why your role hadn't been reviewed for advancement. Nathan was quiet. He said the system didn't flag you, she said. Because you didn't apply for anything above your current grade. I didn't want anything above my current grade, Nathan said. I know that now. I didn't know it then. But what I understood from that conversation was that I'd built a company where an 8-month tenure of excellent work by a former Navy SEAL could pass entirely unnoticed because the system only elevated people who raised their hand. She set her coffee down. That's a design flaw. It's the kind of design flaw that gets you killed, or close to it, and fixing it starts with me actually seeing the people who work here. Nathan sat with that for a moment. You changed something in the facilities system? He asked. I changed the review process for the entire company, she said. Not just facilities. Quarterly supervisor check-ins tied to performance. Not just title advancement. Recognition structure that doesn't require self-nomination. She paused. It's a small thing. It's also the kind of small thing that compounds. He thought about the 2 security officers locked in that storage unit. He thought about Claire Morgan, who had known something was wrong and had kept showing up anyway, tablet in hand, doing her job in the dark. He thought about Torres and Wren, who had come because he called and had asked for nothing. He thought about the kind of institution worth being part of and what it required. I need Mia to be the first priority, he said. Always. School events, sick days, the night she needs me. I can't build a role that competes with that. I know, Isabella said. I've thought about this. The position is structured for a fixed schedule with discretionary response capacity for actual emergencies, not the kind of emergencies that get invented to justify why someone's always on call, real ones. She paused. And if something comes up that I think requires you and you decide Mia comes first, I need to be the kind of employer who respects that. I'm going to be honest with you. That's something I have to learn. I'm not there yet, but I'm trying to build something different than what I had. That kind of honesty was harder to argue with than a polished pitch. Can I have 2 weeks to think about it? He said. You can have 3, she said. Take the time. He nodded. Then he looked at her across the small table in the mismatched coffee shop and said, You're different than the person in that hallway. She tilted her head slightly. Am I? That person would have given me a deadline, he said, and made it sound like an opportunity. She made the small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. The person in that hallway was running on 18-hour days and the consistent belief that if she managed everything tightly enough, nothing would go wrong. A pause. She was also, in retrospect, exhausting to be. Did you know that at the time? I knew something felt unsustainable. I mistook that for ambition's cost instead of a warning sign. She looked out the window at the December street. I've been sleeping more. Claire put it on my calendar, literally blocked it out. 7 to 6:30. She glanced back at him. It sounds ridiculous. It sounds like a person learning to be a person, he said. She looked at him steadily. Is that what you did? When you left the Navy? I had about 18 months of getting it badly wrong first, he said. Mia's mother and I. It didn't survive the transition. I was still operating like I was in a mission cycle. Everything threat assessed. Everything managed from a distance. He paused. She told me before she left that I was the safest person she'd ever been around and she'd never felt further from anyone in her life. Isabella was quiet, listening in the particular way she had when she was genuinely taking something in. I thought she meant I wasn't affectionate enough, he said. It took me a while to understand what she actually meant. That safety isn't the same as closeness, that you can protect something so thoroughly that you never actually touch it. He looked at his coffee. I had to learn to let Mia in, really in, not just provide for her, not just be responsible for her, but let her matter in the way that changes how you make decisions. He paused. That's not something you learn all at once. No, Isabella said softly. It doesn't sound like it. But it's the only thing that made the rest of it make sense, he said. All of it. Leaving the Navy, the work I do now, that night at the Port District. It makes sense because she's in it. Not because she caused it or knows about it, but because she's the fixed point that everything orients around. Isabella looked at him for a long moment. Outside, a couple walked past the window with a dog on a leash, moving fast against the cold. I'd like to build something worth orienting around, she said. A company that someone could point to and say, that's a place that sees people, not just uses them. That's a different kind of ambition, Nathan said. I think it's the harder kind, she said. The forward kind was easier. You just keep moving and call it progress. She wrapped her hands around her cup. This kind requires actually stopping and deciding what you're building and why. Are you stopping? She thought about it honestly, which he'd noticed she did more now. The pause before the answer, the look of someone checking their own work. "I'm slowing down enough to look," she said, "which is a start." Nathan took the 3 weeks. He spent the first week doing the job he'd always done: maintenance checks, vehicle calibrations, the quiet, functional work of keeping things running. He did it the same way he'd always done it, and it felt the same, and that was useful information. He wasn't running from it. He wasn't looking for an exit. He was someone who could do this work and be content in it, and that meant the choice ahead of him was actually a choice and not an escape. He spent the second week talking to Mia. Not about the job specifically. She was 8, and the specifics of corporate security restructuring were not the most effective dinner table conversation. But he talked to her about change and about what it meant to try something new when what you had already was working. And she listened with the focused and slightly crooked attention she brought to things she was genuinely thinking about. "Is it a good change or a scary change?" she asked. "Both, I think," he said. "Both is okay," she said. "Mrs. Garland says things that are both are usually the important ones." He looked at her. "Mrs. Garland is smarter than I give her credit for." "She says that too," Mia said, and went back to her dinner. Captain was under the table beside her feet, which was technically not allowed, and which both of them were choosing not to acknowledge. In the third week, Nathan called Torres. They talked for an hour, which was longer than they'd talked in years. Not about the job offer specifically, but about all the things adjacent to it. About what it meant to come back to something, to use a version of yourself that you'd carefully put away, and whether doing it in a different context for different reasons made it different enough to trust. Torres said, at one point, "You spent 12 years being used for other people's missions. Maybe it's time to pick your own." Nathan sat with that. It was a simple thing to say, and he wasn't sure it was entirely right, but it was close enough to right that it moved something. He called Isabella on a Thursday evening in the third week, after Mia was in bed and Captain had settled at the foot of his chair with the dense, immediate satisfaction of a dog that considered his living situation thoroughly acceptable. "I'll take it," he said when she answered. She was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. Not the boardroom voice, just that, "Okay," like she'd been breathing carefully around a question and could now breathe normally. "Conditions," he said. "Name them." "The schedule structure you described. I need it in writing, in the contract, not as an informal agreement." "Done." "I want Torres and Ren on the team. I'm not asking you to offer them my old position. I'm asking whether there's room for people I trust." "I'll make room," she said, without hesitation. "And I want a direct line to the board that's actually used, not a formality." "Marcus already built it into the security restructuring documents," she said. "It's not contingent on you accepting the role." "I did it because it should have always existed." He nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Then we're agreed." "Nathan," she paused. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he said. "I start Monday, and I'm going to find 100 things wrong with the current setup." "I'm counting on it," she said. Tis. He started on a Monday in January, which was cold and bright in the way early January sometimes was. The sky almost aggressively clear, everything sharp-edged, the city looking like a place that had made a decision about itself. The facilities coordinator, a man named Phil, who Nathan had worked alongside for 8 months, stopped him in the lobby on the way to the elevator and shook his hand and said, "Well, look at that," without any irony, which was the most generous thing someone could have said. Claire Morgan was in the Security Operations Center when Nathan arrived, as she had been every day since the transition began, coordinating the final phases of the department rebuild with the focused intensity of someone who understood exactly what the stakes were and had decided to treat that as motivation rather than pressure. She looked up when Nathan came in, and her expression was something between relief and cautious optimism, which was the honest version of what welcome looked like after a hard season. "The new access protocols are live on floors 20 through 35, she said, without preamble. "The camera mount above the bar on 32 has been replaced, and we have a vendor audit scheduled for Thursday that you'll want to be part of." "Good morning to you too, Claire," he said. She looked slightly startled, and then she smiled. "Good morning," she said. "Coffee's on the credenza. It's the real kind, not the capsule machine." "That's the most important thing you've told me," he said, and she laughed, an actual laugh, the kind that sounded like it hadn't been exercised enough lately, and probably hadn't. He poured a coffee and stood at the window of the operations center, which looked north over the city, and took a moment before the day started to just be in the room. The equipment around him was functional and well-maintained. The team that would populate the space in the next hour were people Claire and he had vetted together over the past 3 weeks. People with records he could read and references he could call, and more importantly, the specific quality of character that showed up not in what people said about their work, but in the small choices they made when nobody was watching. He thought about a camera mount that had been angled slightly off its bracket, and a rotation schedule that could be predicted to the minute, and a man standing in a hallway trying to explain something that he hadn't yet earned the right to have anyone believe. The view from up here was wide. The city was big and full of systems, and the systems were full of people, and the people were doing the best they could with what they understood, and sometimes that wasn't enough, and sometimes someone saw what was wrong before it became irreversible. Not because they were exceptional, because they were paying attention. Isabella appeared in the doorway of the operations center at 8:45, which he noted was earlier than the schedule he'd seen for her day. She was in work clothes, a tablet in one hand, coffee in the other, looking like someone who had somewhere to be and had chosen to be here first. She looked at him at the window, and he looked at her and she said, "How does it look?" He considered the view and the room and all of the things that had to be rebuilt before any of it would be what it should be. "Needs work," he said. "Yes," she said, "it does." She came into the room, and the day began. There is a version of this story that ends with something resolved and clean. The way stories prefer to end. The villain prosecuted, the hero rewarded, the woman who learned her lesson, and the man who found his place, and everything slotted neatly into the future. And some of that is true. Cross was prosecuted. Nathan found his place. Isabella learned things that mattered, but the real thing, the part that doesn't fit the clean version, is that none of it was finished. The work that Nathan walked into that January morning was ongoing and would always be ongoing, because that's what real work was. Not a problem you solved once and moved past, but a responsibility you renewed every day, with the specific knowledge that you were the person responsible for it and that nobody else was going to do it for you. He renewed it every day, not because he had to, because he had figured out, somewhere between a stairwell on the 28th floor and a service road near the Port District in the dark, that the work you choose is different from the work you're assigned. And choosing it, every day, with full knowledge of what it costs, that's the thing that made it worth doing. Mia asked him one evening in February whether he liked his new job. He thought about it honestly, the way she'd learned to expect him to. "Yeah," he said. "I think I do." "Is it hard?" "Some days." "But you still go," she said. "Every day," he said. She seemed to find that satisfying in the practical way she found most things satisfying, but not romantic, just real, the confirmation that something functioned the way it was supposed to. Captain was on the couch beside her, the ear that didn't go up resting against her knee, entirely at peace with the life he'd stumbled into. Nathan looked at the two of them, and out the window at the city that kept going regardless, and at the ordinary Thursday evening that asked nothing of him except to be present for it. He was present for it. That was enough. It was in the end the only thing that ever really was.